Welcome to Deep Pockets with Petra Söderling, the show about governments and innovation. With each episode, we bring you a person and a topic that is part of this larger concept of how countries and regions can create economic advantage by investing in innovation. We're now in season 4. Can you believe it? I call this season the Random Rendezvous. After organizing, scripting, interviewing, editing, and marketing 27 episodes, I wanted to give myself a little slack. This season, I will invite interesting people I meet online, in events, or through work. It will be an open mic approach, no scripting, no theme, just me and the guest talking about whatever we feel like for how long we feel like. Our theme song is by New Orleans jazz icon Leroy Jones. I hope you enjoy this and other episodes. Okay, so I said in the intro that this season is about random rendezvous. In today's episode, the rendezvous is with myself. I have a number of fantastic guests coming up, but because of the summer holiday season, I didn't want to request for people to sit in a studio environment with the headphones on talking about serious technology and economic issues. So in line with the theme, how countries and regions can create economic advantage by investing in innovation, I thought I could just play chapters from my audiobook, Government and Innovation, The Economic Developer's Guide to Our Future. For today, I chose one of my favorite chapters. It tells the story of how South Korea became the dominant master of displays. Take any device in your home, your phone, your computer, your TV. There's a high likelihood that the display is built in South Korea, or at least by South Korean company, or whoever built it has licensed technology from South Korea. That's kind of amazing. Let's listen to the chapter. South Korea and displays. In 1979, Yoon Chae-chung was an aspiring young engineering student at the Seoul National University in the Republic of Korea. Yoon Chae majored in electronics engineering, not exactly knowing what it is. Semiconductor was just a new word heard in a lecture, and he couldn't even imagine a cell phone. His family, living slightly above the poverty line, didn't have a phone line at home. He had no idea of what kind of jobs were ahead, as there were just 2 companies, LG and Samsung, making electronic products like radios and black and white televisions. The economy had sunk into the worldwide recession and into some domestic instability, and he was somehow at loss of direction for his life. The country's president, former General Park Chung-hee, had been leading the nation with a tight authoritarian grip since 1961, and by 1979, the Korean people had had enough. Student activists and other protesters were demonstrating and organizing for democracy in their country, and the Seoul National University was not immune to these events. Young Yoon Chae was not part of the activism, but he became aware of what democracy should look like by participating in big protests several times. The year 1979 was when his eyes opened to both democratic principles and electronics engineering. He felt more interest in telecommunications than in semiconductors, as it was more like communication between people for the democratic society. Park Chung-hee was assassinated on October 26, 1979, by the country's own intelligence service. But it took another 8 years until 1987 for the Republic of Korea to become a full democracy. By that time, Yoon Chae had graduated with a Master of Science degree in Electrical, Electronics, and Communications Engineering, and was about to move to Texas to work on a PhD in data compression. This was after 4 years of work at ETRI, the Electronics and Telecommunications Research Industry, the Korean government-funded research institution in Daejeon, where he was part of the technical staff, and TDX, the Digital Telecom Switch Development Team. Thus, his first career was in telecommunications research and development. The government-funded 4-year project was very successful, and the technology was transferred to the participating companies, which included Samsung and LG. In 1987, having a phone at home was no longer a sign of wealth. As the introduction suggests, the Republic of Korea, more commonly referred to as South Korea, is a country that has gone from being an unstable agricultural economy to a highly industrialized, technologically advanced Western economy in a remarkably short time. In the 1960s, its GDP per capita was comparable with levels in the poorer countries of Africa. By 2004, South Korea had joined the $1 trillion club of world economies. How did they do it? When South Korea rose to number 1 in the Bloomberg Innovation Index in 2016, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization ran an interview with Professor Hoo-jae Park, president of the Office of Strategic R&D Planning in South Korea's Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy. Park is a former professor of mechanical engineering at Seoul National University, our friend Yan Chae-chung's alma mater. In 1998, he founded his own company, an R&D-intensive firm producing test equipment for LCDs, OLEDs, photovoltaics, and semiconductors. As the case with South Korea will demonstrate, research and development is a fundamental driver of economic growth and industrial development. In particular, according to Park, R&D is a key factor in enhancing the technological competitiveness of a developing country. It helps the country avoid the middle income trap from being stuck in the lowest value-added parts of global value chains. The middle income trap is an unfortunate situation where the country's wages have risen so they no longer compete as a low-cost country, yet they don't have the means to create their own high-value industries. South Korea escaped this trap beautifully. In addition to economic growth, the country has had remarkable success in leveraging those achievements to significantly reduce poverty. It was only in 2019 that Korea applied to be released from its World Trade Organization status as a developing country. And it was in 2021 that the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development recognized South Korea as a developed nation. One of the key drivers for South Korea was the decision to invest in a knowledge-driven economy. Due to the fact that the country holds very few natural resources and must import most raw materials and energy, the South Korean people understood the benefits of and bought into this strategy, eventually to everyone's benefit. A 2017 study, The Role of the State as an Interscalar Mediator in Globalizing Liquid Crystal Display Industry Development in South, published by the Korea University in Seoul, looks specifically at how the display industry was instrumental in pulling South Korea up to the list of developed nations and top of the Global Innovation Index. This paper argues that the role of the national state as an interscalar mediator was crucial in coordinating localized growth factors with globalizing external factors to create and develop the LCD industry. Let's see what this complicated statement means in practice. The Korean government used the legacy of the developmental state as a springboard out of poverty. They could have, based on economic success, applied to being categorized as a developed country much earlier than 2019. They didn't do it because being classed as a developing country brought certain benefits. International economic development organizations such as USAID and the World Bank funded and supported Korea's economic growth. These international funds and programs, the globalizing external factors, had essential impact as they were implemented top-down by the South Korean government. Top-down implementation of any program in a democracy, even a young one, requires diplomacy. By being the coordinator and mediator between people with contrasting opinions, the central government brought everyone around the same table so agreements could be made and implementation could go forward. From the 1950s onwards, the Korean government had used 5-year plans as a mechanism to catch up with Western economies. This is a common tool in socialist countries, still successfully used in the People's Republic of China. A good example of the power of these plans is the role of banks. Under their 5-year plans, South Korea nationalized banks, and this way was able to channel controlled capital to large family-owned companies, chaebols, such as Samsung, LG, or Hyundai. Private companies were highly incentivized to implement plans that the central government considered important, including R&D. After the banks were again privatized and 5-year planning was abandoned in 1992, the government continued to encourage private companies to learn, adapt, and implement technologies from leading nations, including Japan and the USA. After graduation, we've sent that Yoon Chae-chong went to work for the national lab, ETRI, the Electronics and Telecommunications Research Institute. As most of the country did not even have landline telephones, ETRI had been tasked to develop a digital switching system to enable building phone lines. The product they were building, TDX, Time Division Exchange, was a success and it helped the country build critical telephone infrastructure. 2 other successful publicly funded projects at that time were the CDMA, Cellular Network Standard, and semiconductor hardware. Core scientific development was done in the government lab, but its commercialization was handed over to private chaebols. The TDX went to Samsung and LG. CDMA also went to those 2 companies, plus newly established Hyundai Electronics. And semiconductors went to LG and Samsung. All of these technologies contributed greatly to the digitalization of South Korea, which was exactly what the leaders of the country had envisioned. Between 1988 and 2019, these policies and practices resulted in real gross domestic product growth, averaging 5.45% annually. This robust performance was fueled by annual export growth averaging 9.27% in the same period. These are good numbers by any industrial standard. By 2003, the idea of a knowledge-based economy had proven itself, but there was more to be done. Until then, the technology industry had been growing on its own, building on the national digitalized infrastructure and the earlier public investments. The administration wanted more coordination, so they strategized resources around 10 selected industries or clusters, one of which was digital TV and displays. These industry clusters were recognized as Korea's next-generation growth engines, a win-win strategy involving large companies and small and medium-sized enterprises, or SMEs. The shift from a catch-up economy to an economy that weaves the creativity and imagination of its people with science, technology, and ICT meant promoting startups and strengthening SMEs. Focusing on the 10 industry clusters was not the only initiative. The central government worked with regional leaders to create regional growth engines, awarded tax benefits for angel investors, and even directly funded startups. The role of the region has been the critical third leg in this success story that the Republic of Korea is today. If the central government led and funded core research which digitalized the country and created domestic intellectual property, and the large private companies productized and commercialized those chosen technologies, then it was the regions that made it attractive to build factories, employ workers, and get those flat TVs, cell phones, and computers out the door and into international markets. Speaking of an international reach, although this is a remarkable story of one Asian country, there are always good friends in these stories that help the protagonist succeed. In our case, it was co-opetition, the cooperation and competition between LG and Samsung with their rivals, companies like Sony, Nokia, or Philips. Building a whole new industry takes more than a handful of OEMs. You need a host of reliable partners, including suppliers, subcontractors, distributors, marketers, and all kinds of professional groups that will lift the tide and enable this new business to succeed with continuity. As other OEMs were picking up on the same technology, they too invested in the cluster areas. Even better, these international competitors were also supported by their own governments, making the cake even bigger for everyone and serving more people in the process. For the Koreans to select displays as one of the 10 essential industry clusters was not accident. An essential driver in the market was the trend to replace tube-based, thick, fat televisions with flat TVs that would look sleeker and take up less space in homes. People had money and they wanted their flat TVs. Liquid crystal display, LCD, was not a Korean invention. The research first started in the US in the 1960s, but Americans didn't have enough interest to make the heavy investment that it would take to get this technique out of the labs and onto the store shelves. LCD was the first technology that enabled thin and light displays. It was successful in both creating the market for these types of devices and making lots of money for industry players at the same time. But soon came an even better technology that enabled even better TVs. OLED, organic light-emitting diodes, is based on an organic substance that acts like a diode. The main difference between LED and OLED is that the latter doesn't need a separate background light. LCD requires a fluorescent tube, or nowadays an LED light. Takatoshi Tsuchimura, a Japanese-born scientist who has been credited with commercializing OLED technology, remembers the early days like this. Quote, "The basic structure of organic light-emitting diodes, OLEDs, was reported by Tang and Van Slyke at Eastman Kodak in 1987. Before any in-depth discussion of OLED display structure, let us consider the initial origins of OLED technology, which are based on early observations of electroluminescence, EL. In the early 1950s, a group of investigators at Nancy University in France applied high-voltage alternating polarity fields in thin air to thin films of cellulose or cellophane containing deposited or dissolved acridine orange and quinacrine, and observed light emission. One mechanism identified in these reaction processes involved excitation of electrons. Then, in 1960, a team of investigators at New York University made ohmic dark injecting electrode contacts to organic crystals and described the necessary work functions for hole and electron injecting electrode contacts. These contacts are the source of charge injection in all present-day OLED devices. End of quote. The involvement of universities in the background research that led to breakthrough inventions in displays largely happened outside of Korea. South Korean companies, with the help of their government, have been phenomenally successful in implementing these technologies in consumer electronic products. Who doesn't have a Samsung or LG product in their home? After the boom days of explosive success of displays, semiconductors, and telecom products, the public officials took a step back and allowed the market to play its course. It hasn't been until recent years that the South Korean government started to consciously increase the nation's R&D spending. As South Korea is no longer a catch-up economy only concentrating in rapid adoption of technologies from other countries, it has recognized the need to stay at the top by relying on homegrown intellectual property. South Korea's R&D expenditures reached $75.4 billion in 2020, accounting for 4.81% of GDP. That made South Korea the second biggest R&D investor in the OECD countries, trailing only Israel, whose R&D investments came to 5.44%. According to OECD, South Koreans' biggest strengths are the willingness to adopt new technologies and the high number of educated young people in the fields of engineering and science. More young people study these subjects in South Korea than in any other OECD country. Most universities provide a comprehensive subject base covering science, social sciences, the humanities, as well as engineering and business. Although having stellar education outcomes linked to a phenomenal economic success, it might surprise you that universities in South Korea are largely privately funded. The Korean government invests heavily in education, but most of this funding has gone to providing basic education for everyone, creating the base for knowledge economy. In recent history, this strategy has been lifting its people out of poverty. Universities have not been and likely will not become major players in the national innovation field for the foreseeable future, as a great deal of current industrial R&D is going into developing new products and markets. The role of universities is to do basic research, public scientific articles and studies, and to train future researchers. Today, their national labs share these goals. Innovation is left to private industry. By looking at the South Korean display industry, its history and success, we are revealing a government-encouraged innovation model that seems to be working for everyone. The state has played a key role in building the enabling digital infrastructure, educating its people, creating critical intellectual property, incentivizing private companies to productize, and regional governments to manufacture. The post-1987 government also realized when they were needed and then when they would be in the way and knew when to graciously step back. What's not to like? What became of our young student friend, Yoon-chae Chong? After working at Hyundai Electronics on the CDMA product, he built an international career in telecommunications, working at Nortel Networks and Samsung for a number of years. After building products in private industry, Yoon-chae transitioned to the National Research Foundation of Korea. His responsibility was to execute the R&D budget of government by making the request for proposals and by selecting grantees. The technologies he covered include quantum computing, supercomputers, the convergence technologies among all tech sectors. That experience opened up a new road to Washington, D.C. to facilitate the international cooperation between USA and Korea in quantum computing technology. Would it surprise you if I said that one of the newest crazes in display technologies is something called quantum dots? People like Yoon Chae will ensure Korea remains successful for decades to come. Key takeaways. 1. Top-down governance works when a country needs a major overhaul. 2. Government can help by creating infrastructure, education, and investing in domestic intellectual property. 3. After incentivizing private companies, the market can run on its own. If you like this story, you can get the whole audiobook from Audible. Search with my name or with the book title Government and Innovation, The Economic Developer's Guide to Our Future. By the way, if you like the technical audio quality and would like to record your own audiobook, I can warmly recommend Studio Aguse here in south of France. They do an amazing job. Plus, you get to stay in a 5-star bed and breakfast in the middle of stunning, idyllic French countryside and villages, and we can meet in person. You've listened to Deep Pockets with Petra Söderling. To subscribe to content, please go to petrasöderling.com. The wonderful music you heard is by Leroy Jones, an iconic New Orleans Jazz Hall of Fame trumpetist. You can find this and other Leroy Jones tunes at your favorite online or offline music store. Thanks for listening, and be sure to subscribe, like, rate, and share our episodes. It means a lot to me and to my guests. Thank you.